been with me before, I'm the sales engineer from the South Central Territory, covering Missouri and Kansas all the way down through Texas, New Mexico, Louisiana. So what I wanted to address today is we tried to come up with a cool gimmick of a name. We came up with the first 5. Basically, I get the question asked a lot of times, what are the default basic settings that every firewall should have? What should you turn on first? What things should you look at and make sure to remember that aren't necessarily in line with the policies and the rules that you create? Because every firewall does have different needs as far as what traffic they need to allow in and out, what they want to do with this. So I wanted to just cover some basics. These are just really under the hood things that you should be checking and doing on your firewall. So as I look at this, some of these are just going to be just some simple basic check boxes that you want to make sure that you cover as you're setting up a new box. So we're not going to do much PowerPoint today, so let me get out of this, minimize that, and what we've got here is I'm dealing with one of our new Firebox T10 models. This is one of our new desktop size units, ideal for sending home with your CEOs, your doctors, your lawyers that want to work from home that might have patient data, critical company data, anything that you want to protect in a home user, or maybe even a kiosk where you've got just 1 or 2 computers running. You have a lot of internet traffic going on. The T10 box is ideal for that. So with that, this is a brand new factory defaulted box right out of the bat. So you can see right here, we've got our 5 basic rules that every WatchGuard firewall comes with, and I'm not really going to cover the policies in this webinar. I'm going to spend some time talking about things under the hood, some check boxes that when I'm going through and setting up a new box, these are the boxes that I make sure I hit every time. So with that said, a couple of things that are just some real basics. Our very first one, a lot of this will live under our setup menu, and some of you guys are probably doing these already, and so you'll have time, or some of this will just be a review for you. Others, if you're new to the WatchGuard, just a few things that I like to make sure that everything is checked every time. So with that, let's dive into number 1. With your firewall, you do want to know what's going on. You want to know what's happening. And a big part of that is our new WatchGuard Dimension log server that gives you the graphical interface and really becomes a more intuitive way of looking at the logs. But it's really important that if somebody says, hey, something happened at this particular time, I think it was about 12:15 at lunch when we were doing some surfing. If your firewall doesn't have the correct time set, then your logs are going to be off because everything gets a timestamp as it happens. As we look at, I can open up our Firebox System Manager and we'll see these logs going by. We won't see a whole lot from this one because there's not much traffic. But every log entry gets a timestamp on it. Right here in the beginning as we wait for this to open up, we look at our traffic monitor. And ready, set, go. It sometimes takes about 5 seconds the first time to get it going. And rather than wait for that, let's jump back over here. This box really has no traffic other than my laptop connected directly to it, so we might not see much traffic going through. So how do you make sure your firewall is got the correct time? Well, we have under our setup menu, go into the NTP settings. I like to just basically enable NTP. You guys can look, there are all kinds of network time providers out there that you can look up. You can use your local college. Many of them run NTP servers. There is the global organization that is responsible for NTP does maintain their own pool of NTP servers. I've been known in the past, I know Oklahoma State, for you guys that are in Oklahoma, they have a very good NTP server, a lot of bandwidth, a lot of capacity that you can use. So if you want to change out the defaults in here, it's just a matter of removing these and adding in NTP dot whatever it happens to be. You can just add additional entries in. This is really just to make sure that your log entries are okay. You want to be able to track things down and see exactly what's going on. So there it is, setting number 1. Like I said, some basic stuff under the hood that we're going to look at. So my second setting that I like to go into is through my subscription services. Now, you guys are familiar with the subscription services. Everything we do has if you have the UTM bundle, you can always see right off the bat in your Firebox System Manager. If you go to the subscription services, you can see when those were last updated. Now, these do not update by default unless you make a couple of changes to your firewall. First of all, you can come in to your Firebox System Manager, come to the Subscription Services tab, and tell it manually update these things. Quick little hint, tip that you might see in here, you'll notice my virus signatures for Gateway Antivirus and my application control are set for January 1st, 1970. That basically means these definitions are at the default. They have never been updated. So how do you make sure these all of your different subscription services update their signatures automatically? You don't want to have to come in here every time and turn these on. So you can come into any of the subscription services that require an update. Gateway Antivirus, I like going into intrusion prevention because it's the least number of clicks, because I can just click right here. First of all, if you're using the intrusion prevention services, this is another one of those checkboxes you want to turn on. Remember, IPS is not turned on by default, so this again is one of those, if you've bought the security bundle, you've got to turn this on. Without IPS being enabled, if we come into one of our rules, our IPS is going to be grayed out. It wants to enable it automatically, but you actually have to enable the function. So under subscription services, intrusion prevention, we can enable that. Couple of things in here, the scan mode, fast scan versus full scan. By default, we go to fast scan. That basically scans the first meg of every file that's coming through looking for those IPS signatures. Full scan will go a little bit deeper into those, but it does come at a performance hit. That's why we default to the fast scan. So this is probably number 2, A and B. So first of all, enable your intrusion prevention services. But then the update server box down here, when you've got this, you've got to turn on and enable automatic updates. When you turn those on, that goes to an interval of 1 hour. By default, the box is going to check in once an hour and then decide which signatures you want to be updated. Of course, intrusion prevention and application control signatures, your gateway antivirus. If you're running the license for data loss prevention signatures, those are all here and ready to go. Just some background information, when we go to those updates, it does go out to services.watchguard.com. If some of you have ever participated in any of our beta programs, they might have had you change off of that services and use a different DNS name in there to do your updates, where you might be dealing with a beta signature set or a non-standard signature set for some reason. So with this, enabling automatic updates, this is setting probably, I guess, 2B, because my 2A was enabling the intrusion prevention and then also enabling the automatic update. Now, one thing that I have been dealing with, if you work for some government agencies or in other cases where you do not want to allow your services to go out and update themselves automatically, in version 11.9.4, there is a function to do a offline signature update. If you do need that capability, it is something that you've got to go through support for, but it is there and available now as of version 11.9.4. And you can bring those definitions down, run whatever compliancy tests you need to run, and then go ahead and apply those to the firewall that way. We won't dive much into that because we were just talking about the basic settings for everybody to get set up. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK here and OK here. So the next setting, the next basic setting that I want to get into is we do have, when our subscription services run, we do have the ability to scan inside of compressed files, inside of zip files. But we actually have to enable that setting to be able to do that. So inside of my Gateway Antivirus settings, under Subscription Services, Gateway Antivirus, and then Configure, you do have a Settings button in here. This is basically just to enable decompression. Gives us the ability to scan inside of any kind of file that might be compressed, whether it's a tar file, gzip, zip file, any of those. Sometimes the bad guys out there will try and zip something up so that it'll sneak past. This does give us the ability to scan inside of those compressed files. So there you go. Like I said, some basic settings. This is number 3 in here that I always turn on. Just make sure you're looking inside of the zip files for all of your scanning. Now, the next section I want to get into will cover a little bit more in here as far as our default threat protection. Very first thing, and this is usually one of the first things that I'll set up, is under default threat protection, the default packet handling. There's a checkbox in here that says send an error message to clients whose connections are disabled. Now, what this does is this actually gives us a little bit of security by obscurity. I've heard it termed that way before. So let's talk about sending an error message to clients whose connections are disabled. This is basically having to do with a ping. What happens when we go out, we want to check if a website is up and running or not. We'll open up our command prompt, and we'll do something like ping google.com. Well, we know, or we can assume, that website is up and running because we've gotten a response from our ping request. The DNS resolves the IP address, and we get a reply back. So we assume, or we know, that there's something there, something's alive. We can ping any number of addresses out there just as a test to see if we're getting connectivity. Well, what happens when we ping a website that, or a firewall that might refuse to respond to pings? Because it's a great security measure. If you don't respond to the pings, then people can't check it. That's a lot of times the first thing that one of the script kiddies will do is they'll run some automated scans. Very first scan, just to see if you're alive, is, hey, let's run a ping. So I'm going to ping novell.com because I know this is a website. I know novell.com is up. I just checked it 20 minutes before our webinar. But when I actually try and do a ping to novell.com, I get the DNS address resolves, but then I get request timed out, excuse me. What's happening in the background here is we send an ICMP request, we send the ping packet over to the web server, and the firewall that's sitting in front of that actually sees that request coming in and says, hey, I don't respond to pings, I'm just not going to send anything back. So we get the idea here. We know there's something there because we know there's a website there, but we get the request timed out response. Well, what happens if we actually try and ping something that doesn't exist? I'm going to just ping something in my local network here. And for those of you that are keeping notes, you can see my IP address scheme on the inside. But this 159 address is a random address in my network that I know nothing lives there. So when I send a ping to that address, I get a different response back. I don't get request timed out. I actually get a destination host unreachable. Now, this is part of the ICMP protocol that when people send a ping request, the next hop back will look and say, in this case, my IP address, 108, it sends a broadcast out, tries to resolve that address, get a MAC address in the background, and then send the ping to. Well, what this is reporting back to me is that when my network card tries to send a ping and tries to resolve that address that doesn't exist, it reports back that there's nothing there. It receives back a destination host unreachable. So this, in essence, is what this checkbox does for us. By checking the box, send an error message to clients whose connections are disabled, we are actually, rather than returning a request timed out, we actually return a destination host unreachable code. And I'm going to jump back. I like this little slide that one of our engineers up in Canada put together, and let me display that a little better for you. Just kind of review what we talked about. When somebody sends a bad guy, a hacker sends a ping to a firewall, that router replies, hey, that I don't reply to pings. I'm not going to send anything back to it. That's an immediate clue. Hey, we know something's there. We know there's a firewall there because I didn't get any response back. In the other scenario where there's no cable connected or that address doesn't exist, so the hacker sends the ping to the WatchGuard firewall. The router, the next step router, replies, hey, I don't know what's there. There's nothing there. That destination is unreachable. By checking that box, we are basically crafting a destination unreachable tool. It's not going to fool everybody, but it might fool some automated systems. So when we get that ping request coming in, we actually send back destination host unreachable as a way to try and mask who we are. If somebody's paying attention, it's probably not going to fool them. But if they are running just some automated processes, that's going to get marked as a dead address. They're not going to run that scan again. They're not going to get in and do any deeper probing because it's marked as something that's not there. Now, while we're in this screen, and I'm just going to take a little bit of a detour and talk about some of the other stuff in here, because our default packet handling gives us some great options to protect us from the internet and from those kind of probes and peaks that people are trying to get into and get some reference to our network. Now, since I'm on this screen, some of the other things that I'd like to talk about when I'm presenting some of the basics here is port space probes. What a port space probe is they've sent a ping to your address. You've responded to that ping. They know that there is something live there. At that point, they start sending a port space probe. And they'll check and say, okay, we've got a response from somebody at 10.20.30.1. We're going to now try and see, are the common ports open on that? So they'll start scanning. If they start scanning at the beginning, all the better, because we have other ways of detecting that. But they might start hitting common ports right in sequence. They'll hit 25 and 53 and 80 and 443. So what they're doing is they've got a known good address. They're scanning to see what ports are open in that. So in this case, the default setting is port space probes is 10. I like to lower that down to a much lower threshold value so that if I see a certain IP address, the source address of my traffic, if they hit me at port 25, 26, 27, 28, I don't want to wait until they get all the way up to 35 before I block them. I want to lower that value down to about 3. So if somebody hits me on an open port, chances are if it's legitimate traffic, they're going to hit on a known port and they're going to get the information they need and they're going to respond back. They're not going to start hitting multiple random ports on my firewall. So after 3, if the same address hits me on 3 different ports within the first second of a connection, then I know I don't want to talk to them because I know they're doing a scan to me. So I like to lower that down. The address space probe is kind of the inverse. Rather than looking at for open ports, they're actually searching for IP addresses. You always have to have an IP and a port to allow traffic through. So the address space probes says, hey, here's a block of addresses. You've paid your ISP, so you have your 5 or 10 static IP addresses. And what they'll do is they'll pick a common port like port 80. And in my case, my IP addresses start at .9, my publics that I've paid for. So they'll hit .9 and then .10 and then .20, or I'm sorry, excuse me, 9, 10, 11. I do know how to count, I swear. So as they run through and start scanning all of these different addresses, they're just picking a known port that's common to be open, port 80, for example, port 25 for email, and they'll run through all of those. Well, what happens if you only have a block of IP addresses? You're never going to time out a port space probe because you only have 5 public IPs. You're allowing them to contact 10 different IPs before you block them out. So again, this is another one of those settings I like to lower to a much lower value. Somebody shouldn't hit you on multiple different addresses from the same port in sequence like this. So these are a couple of different ways to protect yourself from the bad guys out there. So once I've lowered those down, I'm going to go back into my setup menu and under my default threat protection and go to the blocked ports menu. Now, blocked ports, there's a checkbox in here that says automatically block sites that try to use blocked ports. Now, this box is extremely important. This is my 5th of the first 5 that you want to make sure you have checked and enabled on your firewall. What this does is this enables the firewall to actually auto-block. And a lot of firewalls don't have this capability. This is something that it's not completely unique to WatchGuard, but there's not everybody does this. Where if we detect some kind of scan going on, or if we detect that some unwanted traffic is hitting our firewall repeatedly, as opposed to just ignoring those, and we still have to process the request, if we get these requests coming in for a some kind of malicious traffic, something that we've decided we want to ignore, by checking this box, it enables the firewall to automatically block sites that try and use that. So first of all, you have your list up here of known blocked ports that that if somebody tries to hit. Port 1 is never a valid port for any kind of internet traffic. It just exists because we have to start counting at 1. So if somebody has an automated tool where they want to run a scan ports 1 through port 65,000, they're going to hit every conceivable known port to try and find where your weaknesses are. If somebody hits us on port 1, we recognize right away that's not valid traffic. We're going to block that traffic, and we're not even going to respond to requests. This can help in some denial of service attacks, so that if somebody is hitting you on a block on a port that you know, or you can recognize from your traffic and from your logs, you can add that additional port in here and say that we're not even going to respond to those, and that'll help mitigate some of that. But this also handles if you ever create a firewall rule. I'm going to go ahead and say OK here, and just add in a quick packet filter for, we'll say SMTP. I'm not running a mail server, so I want to block traffic. If I actually set this to deny coming in from the outside, remove my any trusted, and do it this way. So I'm basically reversing the default action, so it's coming in from the outside, coming to the inside, and I'm denying that traffic on port 25. I can actually check this box here that says auto block sites that connect to this, so that if I know I'm not running a mail server, somebody hits me with a scan rule or a scan tool on port 25 because it's a common known port, that auto block feature is not going to work in this case. I've blocked inbound SMTP, and I've also said that if anybody tries to connect me on that, I'm going to ignore all subsequent connections for those because I know it's not valid traffic because I'm not running a mail server. That type of rule is not going to work unless you come in here and enable this checkbox. So this is one of those really important ones to make sure that auto blocking feature of the WatchGuard is able to work and protect you. So that covers the first 5. Just a couple other quick ones, just some odds and ends. Underneath your setup menu, under global settings and your networking, we have this enable all traffic management and QoS features. Now this box is not enabled by default because there is some performance hit. If you turn on traffic management, there's some extra checks that have to go through every packet that gets sent through the firewall. We have to check if there's any kind of prioritization attached to that. So on your small boxes, this is the caveat here, on your small T10s, your 25s, and your 26s, if you're not doing traffic management, don't enable this checkbox. On your bigger boxes, they've got enough horsepower. If you enable this and still don't use it, they're not going to see any difference. So with that, if you turn on and enable your traffic management, at that point you can go into any of your rules that you have on the firewall, go to the Advanced tab, and then actually set traffic management actions where we can guarantee bandwidth or limit bandwidth, so that in this case, if somebody's on an FTP connection, I don't want them to use up more than 1 meg. I can set that up and use that so that upload and download. But again, that's not going to work. This is all going to be grayed out unless you check that box. So this covers just the first few things, the first few check boxes that I always want to make sure I run through and hit. From here, it's a matter of deciding what policies and rules that you need to enable to allow traffic through your firewall. But at this point, that covers those first 5 settings. Now, if anybody does have any questions about these, please make sure you enter those in the chat. We are not going to take time today to go through and answer those, but I will, if you enter the messages in the question section on your webinar, we will make sure we respond to those via email. I try and get back to those within the first few days after the webinar. Again, thank you for your time, and I will turn everything back over to Elaine to wrap up.
All right, Dan, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. That's it for today, folks. Thank you for attending. Have a great day. I'll go ahead and close out the line, but I will keep the webinar up for just a moment to allow anyone else to input any questions. So have a great rest of the day. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk with you next month. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.